Dr. Ramin Oskoui, a renowned U.S. cardiologist, joined Laura Ingraham on the Ingraham Angle on Friday night. Dr. Oskoui has been a frequent guest discussing the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. Dr. Oskoui also is not a fan of befuddled Dr. Tony Fauci. Dr. Ramin Oskoui, herd immunity is how all pandemics end. Whether it's induced by the use of vaccine or not. Under the age of 60, this virus acts as a prototype of the coronavirus vaccine. It makes you a little bit ill and you move on. Look at our own president. He had it. He was on vitamin D, zinc, and Pepsid. He was sick for a few days and now, you've seen him all this week campaigning. The man looks as robust and energetic as he ever has. Trending exclusive, Larry C. Johnson interviews John Paul Macisak, the American patriot who was hired to fix Hunter Biden's computers, and the rest is history. Laura Ingraham, now Dr. Fauci has taken another shot at that great Barrington Declaration, Dr. O, which of course is all the hundreds and hundreds of doctors and healthcare professionals opposing lockdowns and other severe COVID restrictions. Dr. Ramin Oskoui, I think some have accused him of being responsible for this crime against humanity. The reality is, never in human history have we locked down a whole society. You quarantine the sick. You quarantine the vulnerable. You don't shut down the whole country. What he is suggesting is scientifically antithetical and unsubstantiated. I'm shocked that this man has any sort of podium anymore. He's been wrong so many times. It's terrible. I think the biggest mistake was involving him. Laura Ingraham, I'm shocked that he's still heading the coronavirus task force. Via the Ingraham Angle. It's hard to believe, but America's top infectious disease Dr. Anthony Fauci has been wrong on the coronavirus pandemic, almost every step of the way. Here is a list of several errors, contradictory statements, and dangerous gaffes by NIAID Director Dr. Tony Fauci. 1. Dr. Fauci says he warned Trump in January that the US was in real trouble, but that is not what he said publicly. In January, Dr. Anthony Fauci told Newsmax TV that the United States did not have to worry about the coronavirus and that it was not a major threat. 2. Dr. Fauci warned of an apocalyptic coronavirus pandemic, then just weeks later he compared the coronavirus to a bad flu. 3. Dr. Fauci based all of his predictions on the garbage IHME models that were off by millions, and then later told reporters, you can't really rely on models. 4. On March 20, Dr. Fauci jumped in and corrected the president during a press briefing on hydroxychloroquine treatment for coronavirus, saying, you got to be careful when you say fairly effective. It was never done in a clinical trial. It was given to individuals and felt that maybe it worked. Exactly 2 weeks later, hydroxychloroquine was deemed the most highly rated treatment for the novel coronavirus in an international poll of more than 6,000 doctors. 5. Dr. Fauci pushed these garbage models every step of the way. In March, Dr. Fauci claimed 1 million to 2 million Americans would die from coronavirus. Then he said 100,000 to 200,000 Americans will die from the virus. Then weeks later he agreed 81,766 Americans would die from the coronavirus. Then later the experts cut the number of deaths to 60,415 projected deaths. 6. On Easter, Dr. Fauci suggested President Trump should have shut down the economy. In February, when the number of known cases in the US was around 100, Fauci later walked back his attacks. 7. Dr. Fauci said cruises were okay on March 9. That was a huge error. 8. Dr. Fauci said malls, movies, and gyms were okay on February 29. That was another huge mistake. 9. Dr. Fauci was wrong about the first coronavirus deaths in the country. Dr. Fauci, Dr. Birx, and the CDC were off by nearly a month. California officials revealed in April that a patient in Santa Clara died from coronavirus on February 6, not February 29. 10. Dr. Fauci and the CDC missed the millions and millions of US citizens who had already contracted the coronavirus before the draconian lockdowns took place. Knowing this could have prevented the economic calamity. 11. On April 15, 2020, Fauci endorses Tinder hookups. Unbelievably. Then said Americans should never shake hands again. 12. Dr. Fauci to lock down the United States and destroy the US economy. Meanwhile, this delays the herd immunity that is needed to prevent a future outbreak of this deadly virus. 13. Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx used the Imperial College model to persuade President Trump to lock down the entire US economy. The Imperial model has since been confirmed as a complete fraud. 14. Dr. Fauci warned that Georgia would see a surge in coronavirus cases and deaths by opening their economy too early. He was wrong again. In fact, the opposite happened. 15. And on Tuesday during testimony, Dr. Fauci told Dr. Rand Paul that opening the schools would not be a good idea. This was after the Netherlands and Switzerland reopened their schools, after finding children are not at risk from coronavirus and are not carriers of the virus. 16. Fauci praised New York State's response to the COVID crisis despite it dumping sick seniors in nursing homes and having the worst record in the world. 17. Dr. Fauci recently called for continued economic lockdowns until at least the end of winter. 18. In September, Dr. Fauci called people to refrain from going to movie theaters until we have a COVID vaccine for a year. 19. Dr. Fauci condemned attendance to Trump rallies but not Black Lives Matter rioting.